Tonight I'm telling you about the moment a single whisper turned an ordinary evening into the kind of memory that keeps tapping your shoulder weeks later. I'd made tea, closed the curtains, and planned to forget the world, until a knock at my door and a quiet sentence from the neighbor's grown son slid into my life and rearranged the furniture of my heart. Before I dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, what city, what little corner of your night, so I can picture you there with me as this unfolds. The day had been perfectly forgettable, the kind where the clock eats hours in uniform bites and leaves nothing worth saving. I was still in my house clothes, the kind of soft gray sweater that has learned the shape of my shoulders, when I noticed the porch light humming like it always does after dusk. I live alone, my daughter's grown, my career steady but quiet, and the evening routine is a rhythm I could tap in my sleep. Kettle, sugar jar, the click of the radio, the familiar sigh of the sofa. I treasure that small orchestra of privacy. It makes me feel like I'm tucking the day into its own bed. That's when I heard it, the quick, uncertain knock. Not the rattling fist of a delivery driver, not the lazy rap of a friend who knows they can walk in. This knock held its breath. I opened the door to find David, the neighbor's son I still call the boy out of habit, even though he's 29 now, tall and careful in the way men become after they learn that clumsiness can bruise other people. I've known him since he was the lanky kid racing his bike in crooked circles near our mailboxes, while his parents weeded the garden. Back then he'd wave at me with grass-stained hands and a grin that could have sold sunshine. I watched him grow into a gentle man who returns his cart at the grocery store and always checks whether the elderly neighbor needs her packages carried inside. You can see a person's whole moral map in the little errands they do without being asked. He apologized for coming late. I told him it wasn't late, not really, and stepped aside. He held a small paper bag from the corner bakery and a cautious smile that didn't quite rise. "I remembered you like the cinnamon knots," he said, which is true, and also a small miracle, because the last time I mentioned those pastries was several months ago, when we met on the sidewalk and his mother fussed about my garden hose freezing in January. I set the kettle to sing again, and he took off his jacket, careful to shake off the last drops of drizzle at the door. He looked like he'd been walking in circles inside his own thoughts all afternoon. There was a dampness to the air that made the windows shiver, and I noticed how the porch light framed him like a second moon when he passed it. I brought mugs. He brought his unspoken reason. "So," I said, "are you escaping a birthday party or something worse?" He laughed softly. "Something quieter," he said. "Work. And, well, I guess the kind of thoughts that talk too loudly when the apartment is empty." We sat at my small kitchen table, the one that has a scratch shaped like a river where I once dragged a vase without lifting it. He listened as the kettle eased into silence. When I poured the tea, steam fogged my glasses and made the room look gentle. The bakery bag folded open like a mouth telling the truth. 2 cinnamon knots, sugar-dusted and still warm. He broke one in half and handed it to me with both hands. We talked about stupid things first, the price of avocados, the new paint on his parents' porch, the neighbor's cat that has decided my herb patch is its throne. He told me his job was steady but thin on meaning lately, like a book written in tidy sentences that refused to glow. I told him about the new lighting I'd put in the entryway and how one brighter bulb had made my hallway look like it had been ironed. We laughed at that. Every time his smile arrived, it felt like a door quietly unlocking somewhere. But there was something behind his eyes that kept peeking out, then retreating, like a shy animal at the edge of a clearing. He sipped his tea and stared at the chipped rim as if it might offer a script. Outside, rain rearranged itself on the porch roof. Inside, we let the kind of silence grow that is not empty but waiting. "I almost didn't come," he said finally. "I've started 3 messages to you and deleted them all. I didn't want to be a problem." "You're not a problem," I said, "because some words need to be planted quickly before doubt crowds them out. You're a person at my table." His shoulders loosened a little. He looked toward the window, then back at me. "I keep hearing something my grandmother used to say," he murmured. "Make a soft place for your own heart to land. And I think I've been landing on concrete for months." I watched his hands. Elegant, nervous, clean. The knuckles showed faint, pale lines from some long-forgotten boyhood scrapes. "Tell me what you need," I said. He nodded, grateful, as if a tight knot in his chest had just found a pair of scissors. He told me about a relationship that had ended in the kind of polite ending that still leaves a mess. He told me about the way his father sometimes speaks in advice when all he wants is listening. He told me about the silence of his apartment and the way it recorded every footstep like a court stenographer for loneliness. He told me he'd walked past my house twice before knocking, and that each time the warm square of light in my kitchen window felt like a lighthouse he wasn't sure he was allowed to approach. I felt the truth of his words settle on the table between us like a folded sweater. I am at an age where I measure people by how carefully they set their truths down. David placed his gently. "I don't know why I told you all that," he said, looking embarrassed. "I think because you look like the kind of person who remembers the names of her plants." "I too," I said, "even the ones that don't thrive." He smiled. The air shifted. Not a spark. Nothing dangerous. More like a small candle was lit in a room neither of us had visited in a long time. Warmth, not heat. We cleaned the plates, not because they were dirty, but because the act of rising, rinsing, returning, gave our words time to catch up. When we sat again, his posture had changed. He looked like someone who had put down a backpack he didn't realize he'd been wearing all day. He checked his phone, winced at the time, then slid it face down. "I should go," he said, but didn't move. The rain had eased to a hush. The house listened. "Walk me to the door," he asked, and it wasn't a question so much as a wish spoken quietly. At the threshold, with the porch light painting a halo on the mat, he turned to me like a page being turned carefully by clean fingers. The air between us felt newly ironed, flat, fresh, ready to be written on. He looked into my face in a way that wasn't hungry or careless. It was the look of a person choosing a sentence with respect. "This is going to sound odd," he said, leaning in so his voice wouldn't bother the rain. "But I need to say it once, so it doesn't haunt me later as the thing I should have said." I held my breath without meaning to. I know that place, the doorway between what is and what could be, the hinge squeaking softly as choice leans on it. He whispered, "When I see you out in the garden in the mornings, you look like you're listening to the world, not trying to control it. And every time I think, that's what kindness looks like. I just wanted you to know that someone notices the way you are." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a proposition. It was something tenderer. Recognition. A mirror offered without demand. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years, a good ache, like standing near the ocean after months inland. The word that flashed through me was seen. Not younger, not flattered, just seen. It's astonishing what a simple, careful truth can do to a room, to a life. I couldn't speak for a moment. I put my hand on the doorframe because the house felt like it might lift. Then I did the only thing that matched his courage. I stepped closer, not enough to startle either of us, just enough to make sure the space between our sentences was warm. "Thank you," I said, "for trusting me with that, for trusting yourself with that." He smiled, but there was a rim of tears he didn't try to hide. "I didn't want it to be a secret that turned into a weight," he whispered. "I also don't want to make your life complicated." "You haven't," I said. "You've made it honest." We stood there, listening to the kind of quiet that happens when two people choose to be careful with each other. The rain stitched itself into the lawn. Somewhere down the block, a television laughed on behalf of strangers. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, calm but awake. He reached for my hand, not gripping, not claiming, simply asking a question without words, and I let my fingers rest in his. The contact was brief and soft, like pressing a note into someone's palm. He squeezed once and released, a promise that pressure would never be his language. Everything safe, everything patient, everything deliberate. "I should go," he said again, and this time the world agreed. He stepped out beneath the porch light and turned, hesitating as if the night were a sentence he needed to finish properly. "Sarah?" he asked, my name in his voice like a small bridge. "If I brought a book next time, would you let me read to you? I think I've forgotten how to share quiet with someone." "I would like that," I said, and the words felt like warm bread. He walked down the path, hands in his pockets, shoulders light. The puddles made small galaxies around his steps. At the gate he glanced back, as if to make sure I was still there, and I lifted my hand in a slow wave. He answered with that half-smile that grows from the inside out. When the door clicked shut behind me, the house didn't feel empty the way it sometimes does. It felt like a violin left on a chair after the musician steps out for fresh air, still resonant from the last note. I leaned my forehead against the wood and let myself feel exactly what I felt, no editing. A whisper had rearranged the furniture of my heart, but not by shoving anything aside. It had invited things closer together. Self-respect beside tenderness, caution beside curiosity, memory beside possibility. I washed the mugs slowly, noticing small details I usually miss, the way the steam makes tiny rivers down the window, the faint cinnamon scent rising from the plate, the exact shade of gold where the porch light finds the brass handle. My life has never been a movie, and I don't want it to be. I want it to be what it is, a series of rooms where people enter, sit with their truths, and leave me gentler than they found me. Later in bed, the whisper returned, not to demand, not to unsettle, but to remind. It pressed into the space behind my ears where tender phrases go when the day is done. "You look like you're listening to the world." It's rare, at my age, to receive a compliment that doesn't try to bend you. This one simply lit up the room and let me see it better. I didn't sleep right away. I laid there counting the small things in the dark, the steady breath of the house, the soft clatter of the heater switching off, the rain signing its name across the roof. I thought about how we become caretakers of each other's courage when we tell the simple, gentle truth. And I thought about how he'd asked to read to me. I tried to imagine which book he might bring and how his voice would sound wandering its pages. Before the night yawned too far, I reached for my phone and typed a message I didn't send yet. "Next time bring the book you love and the story you've been saving." Then I erased it. Not because I didn't mean it, but because some words are better hand-delivered in the doorway, where their shadows can fall in the right places, where the porch light can give them a soft edge. When morning came, I stood in the garden with my tea, as I always do. The rosemary brushed my sleeve like a friend. I listened to birds gossiping, to a delivery truck making promises, to my own breath counting the seconds between sips. I realized I wasn't haunted at all, not the way we use that word. I was accompanied. His whisper wasn't a ghost. It was a lantern. And if a lantern follows you into the day, you don't argue. You notice your steps more kindly. You leave the gate slightly open. If you're still with me, tell me again where you're watching from, your city, your street if you like, the quality of your night, because I want to imagine this kitchen table stretching long enough to seat you too. There's another part to this story, of course there is. But for now, I'll leave you with the sound of rain letting the garden breathe, and a promise that careful words, spoken with respect, can change the shape of an evening without breaking a single thing. The next morning came soft, pale, and honest, the kind of morning that doesn't demand you hurry. I woke to the faint smell of rain on the soil, the house still wearing its nighttime quiet like a shawl. I made my usual cup of tea and opened the curtains wider than usual, half expecting to see the familiar outline of David walking to his car or carrying something for his parents next door. But the street was still freshly washed. The world felt both ordinary and new, like someone had rearranged its colors while I slept. I spent the morning cleaning, though there wasn't much to clean. Sometimes we tidy our spaces to organize our thoughts. Every time I passed the doorway where he'd whispered to me, I caught myself pausing, just a heartbeat longer than necessary. His words hadn't left. They'd taken a seat somewhere inside me, quiet but present. You look like you're listening to the world. It still made something inside me exhale. Around noon, I went to water the rosemary. The sunlight was pushing through the clouds in wide strokes, and everything it touched seemed newly forgiven. I was bent over the planter when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You always start with the rosemary." I turned. David was leaning on the fence, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a book, the same paperback I'd once mentioned liking but never found again. He smiled, hesitant but warmer than last night's rain. "I didn't know if you'd be around," he said, "but I brought this. You said you liked stories that leave you thinking after the last page." I laughed softly. "You remembered that from months ago." "I remember a lot of what you say," he replied. "It's strange. Some people talk and it all blurs. You talk and it stays." I motioned him in. "Well, if you came this far, you might as well come in before the tea gets cold." We settled into the living room this time, less formal, more like two people who already knew they could be quiet together. I brewed fresh tea, and he opened the book between us. It was Asterisk, The Remains of the Day Asterisk, a story about quiet dignity, about missed chances and the tenderness of restraint. I remember thinking how fitting that choice was. He began to read aloud, his voice even and low, each word placed with care. There's something about being read to. It slows time, lets the mind breathe. I watched his hands hold the pages open, steady and sure, and found comfort in the simplicity of it. We paused every few paragraphs to talk. About the characters, about choices made too late, about how people sometimes protect their hearts so well they forget to let anyone see them. His thoughts surprised me, insightful, reflective, unguarded. It wasn't attraction that moved through the room, it was recognition. Two people realizing they spoke a similar emotional language after years of silence. At one point, he stopped reading and looked at me in that same way as before. Careful, searching. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been," he asked, "if you'd let someone see you sooner?" It wasn't a question meant to pry, but it still found the tender spot under my ribs. I smiled. "I think about it sometimes, but I also think every version of my life brought me here. And here isn't so bad." He nodded slowly, his expression full of something I couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe gratitude, maybe both. We went on reading until the light shifted and the afternoon turned golden. When the chapter ended, he closed the book and let his hand rest on the cover. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy. It was content, like a cat curling in sunlight. Finally, he said, "I think I needed this more than I knew." "I think I did too," I said, surprising myself. When he rose to leave, I walked him to the door again. The air smelled of wet leaves and something faintly sweet, maybe from the bakery down the street. He turned, the same way he had the night before, as though words were collecting at the back of his throat. "Can I come by again?" he asked. Not to talk about anything heavy. Just to read, or sit, or listen to the rain if it decides to come back. "Yes," I said almost before he finished. "You can." He smiled, softer this time, like the edge of a page being turned carefully. "Then I'll bring another story, something lighter, maybe one that ends well." After he left, I stood at the door longer than I meant to, watching the space he just occupied. I didn't feel lonely. I felt present. It's strange how quickly comfort can grow when it's watered with respect instead of expectation. Days passed that way for a while. Quiet visits, shared readings, laughter between paragraphs. Nothing rushed, nothing hidden. just two people choosing gentleness in a world that too often forgets it exists. But one evening, when the light outside was the color of honey and the air smelled like tomorrow's rain, he came by looking different, restless, uncertain. He didn't bring a book. "Can we walk?" he asked. We went down the narrow path by the trees. The leaves whispered above us, the world humming its small, secret music. When we reached the bench near the old oak, he stopped. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about how easy it is to feel safe with you. How rare that is. But I don't want to misunderstand it. I don't want to turn something beautiful into something selfish." His words disarmed me in the best way. I sat beside him, the distance between us careful but warm. "You haven't misunderstood anything," I said. "You've given me something kind, something people our age forget to believe in, that emotional closeness doesn't always need a label to be meaningful." He nodded, eyes glimmering. "I guess I just needed to know you felt that too." We sat there until dusk deepened into evening, talking about ordinary things, the taste of good bread, the smell of rain on pine, the sound of trains in the distance. The kind of conversation that doesn't chase conclusions but cherishes the middle. When he finally stood, he reached out, not for a hug, not for anything grand, but to brush a stray leaf from my shoulder. "I'll bring the next story soon," he said. "Maybe the one we'll never finish reading, just so there's always a reason to come back." And he walked away with that same quiet grace that first brought him to my door. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how rare it is to meet someone who sees you clearly without needing to define you. His whisper from that first night still echoed in me, but it no longer haunted, it hummed. It had become a melody, a soft promise that no matter how ordinary our days look, they can still be touched by something extraordinary. The courage to speak gently, and the wisdom to listen deeply. And when I closed my eyes, I realized that maybe the things that stay with us aren't always confessions or kisses. Sometimes they're the whispers that remind us we're still capable of being moved, quietly, honestly, and without regret.